Yeah, I would say if you grew up in a complicated family, or if you ever struggled to love a family member without abandoning yourself in the process, then my book is for you. I really want my story to give you permission to name both the joys and the heartaches of difficult families, and what it's like to kind of find your own voice. I want to show you how I created a path and found peace, and hopefully that will feel validating and you, as you set on your own journey to find peace.
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter, another great author on the podcast, as always. And I'm so excited to talk to authors and learn about their journey as a writer and putting their story out into the world. And Gina's here to talk about Forces of Nature and her new book. It's exciting. It's coming soon, and we're excited about that. And we're going to get to know a lot more about Gina on the show. Gina, welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. For those listening at home and wherever you are today, can you let everybody know where you are in this big world of ours, Gina?
Yes, I live just outside of Boulder, Colorado. So right on the edge of the Rockies.
Oh, come on. Right? So
It's
how
wonderful.
far from your house to be standing in front of the Rockies and see them in their grandeur? How far?
I can see them from my house. The foothills start about 20 minutes west of me, so I can kind of hit the trails on a moment's notice, which is nice. And then if you want to get up higher into the mountains, it's a little less than an hour.
Wow. Beautiful. That's amazing. Yeah, I'm a little jealous. I love mountains. I love it's like so random how it's so flat here and then it's just majestic and they just come out of it just rise into the sky. It's gorgeous. I love it.
Yeah.
So you got me there.
Try not to take it for granted.
No. And I notice when I look at the cover of your new book, I see mountains. Does that kind of go together there?
Yeah, that's not a coincidence. I think one of the themes of the book is how nature mirrored my experience. So the landscape kind of served as a mirror to the experiences that I had. And it also was a vehicle for healing, and continues to be. I think anytime things are difficult in life, getting outdoors and kind of connecting with nature and the mountains is really, really healthy and beneficial.
Amazing. So your book comes out in May.
It
That's
does,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about Forces of Nature. Give us an overview of the book, and then we're going to jump into the story behind the book.
Yeah. So my older brother had a rare genetic condition that caused him to be really, really loving one minute and really violent the next. And when he died very suddenly at age 43, I was left with some questions. The biggest question was what happened, which I think people can identify with. Anytime somebody dies really suddenly, you want to know what happened. But also because of his disability, which included some intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities, I had some questions like, did he know that I loved him? Was he capable of feeling and understanding that love? What did he think of our relationship? Was he able to kind of hold the idea that somebody could fear him and also love him?
Mm.
And then I also wondered if I had done enough as a sister and as a caregiver, and, if the systems that were designed to protect him had failed in some way. So some of those questions had answers and some did not. But my memoir was kind of me following the beam of a flashlight towards those questions, kind of writing towards them. And what I came to understand was the questions about Alan and the questions about what happened to him were really a question about what happened to me and what happened to us growing up. And so the book looks at that. It looks at what happened to him, what happened to us, what it was like to grow up alongside somebody who had intense medical and behavioral needs and special needs. And in the end, it kind of became a book that answered a question for a lot of people, which is, how do you navigate growing up in a complex family where somebody else always needs more. How do you find your voice and your
Yeah.
path in the world?
Yeah, because everyone's struggling with identity as well. Every day, all of us are struggling to find our place in the world, but then to find our place in a world where someone's needs might overarch your needs in the moment, and you're kind of relegated to possibly second place in the family because this other person requires more help and more assistance. Then yeah, that must be a struggle to find your identity even within your own home then. So this was your whole life growing up like this then? This has kind of been your path from the beginning then?
Yeah. And, there were some things that were very specific to me and very unique to my story. But there are things that I think a lot of siblings, special needs siblings, can identify with. For me, my parents split when I was about 5 years old. So I kind of stepped into the parental role in supporting my mother from a very young age. And she also had some untreated mental illness that prevented her from showing up as well as I think she wanted to. So it definitely defined my entire childhood, and it was normal because I didn't really know anything different. But as I got older, I kind of was looking for other stories that reflected that experience, the sibling experience, especially. And there just isn't much out there. There's a lot more being written about disability, and there's a lot more about parenting kids with disabilities, but the voice of the sibling is still not being heard as much. So essentially, I wrote the book that I wish that I had as a gift, maybe to my younger self, and hopefully a gift to anyone else that might need to read it.
So how did the family dynamics, like, was your brother older than you, younger than you? Kind of explain a little bit of that dynamic as well.
Yeah, he was 3 years older than me. So
Okay.
I was born into what I call kind of the after. I think there was probably like a before and after moment for my parents where, things were okay and then they weren't okay when he was born, and they realized that he had some really intense needs and some severe disabilities. So he was 3 years older than me, and we have a younger brother who's also typically developed, who's 2 years younger than me. So it was an interesting dynamic because even though Alan was 3 years older than me, developmentally, I surpassed him at a pretty young age. So I kind of had the experience of being a middle child, but also the oldest child.
Wow.
And it was just, and it lent some confusion to him too, because, he didn't understand intellectually why his younger sister was in charge and why his younger sister was taking care of him. And that was a point of frustration for sure too.
So tell me more about him as a person. What stands out from your memory growing up with him? And you talk about there's times where he's extremely loving. Let's focus on that for a moment. What kind of things would he do within your home and with you, the two of you, that made you feel warm and safe with him?
Mm. Yeah, he loved animals. It's interesting if you know anything about Prader-Willi. It's a rare condition, but there's a few things that are kind of hallmarks of that condition, and one of them is kind of an obsessive behavior pattern or obsessive compulsive disorder. And his obsessions were actually really wonderful. He was obsessed with dogs and animals. He would talk about any pets that we had. He would constantly be planning their food and their toys and their next outing. And so he could be extremely gentle. He's almost like a dog whisperer with pets. And he also had this passion for Christmas year round. He was obsessed with Christmas. He would listen to Christmas music, kind of classic Bing Crosby Christmas albums all year round. And he had a Walkman tape player that he had, strapped to his belt, and headphones. And so we wouldn't hear the music, but we would hear him singing along to the music. And it was really endearing. It was funny because for him, singing sounded like shouting. So he was basically shouting Christmas music at us all the time. He believed in Santa Claus up until the day he died. So
Wow.
that was just like a really sweet, tender thing about him. And other things, cars. He was obsessed with cars. He loved people. He could memorize people's birth dates and phone numbers and shoe sizes. And, there's just kind of quirky, fun things that endeared him to a lot of people.
And that endearment makes caring for someone a little bit easier because you're seeing that back and forth and those loving moments. And it's great to connect that way. But then, as your book talks about, there's another side to this where it goes from loving to fear, I'm taking it, and kind of anxiety and not knowing what's coming next. Can you explain a little bit of that side then too, to give us some balance here?
Yeah, he would go from really loving to really violent pretty quickly. And as a kid, I think I understood on some level that it was outside of his control. It was not like a malicious violence. It wasn't like, it wasn't a reflection of how he felt about us. But if something didn't go his way, or another thing that was really common with Prader-Willi, people who have Prader-Willi don't have a cue. They don't have the hormones or the neurological cues that tell them when they're full, when they're eating, and they're constantly hungry. And so we had to be very protective of him around food, and we had to control food in the house. And otherwise he would eat food from the trash, or he would just eat until he made himself sick. And so a lot of the caretaking of him was around food, monitoring, and control. And if I did anything to prevent him from getting at the trash or the food, then he would respond really violently. Everything from kicking and punching to throwing furniture through windows. It was just a very neurological, sudden reaction that really, there wasn't emotion involved. He just, I was preventing him from getting what he wanted. And he was twice as big as me. So, the consequences were pretty severe. And then almost as quickly as he would turn violent, he would turn back to being loving again and would not really understand why I was maybe crying or in pain. So that was a challenge, obviously. I mean, that was, and I think a lot of people who have grown up in families where somebody has a profound disability understand kind of that you're walking on eggshells, and when it comes to behavior issues, you don't know exactly what's going to trigger a outburst essentially is like a temper tantrum.
Yeah. You mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that you wished you had this book back early days for your own journey, but in absence of this book of Forces of Nature, what resources did you have? It sounds like you were parenting your mother, helping with your brother. You're kind of stepping into a role that most children wouldn't have to deal with. Who was there for you in all of this to help you understand what was going on, support you? Did you have any support at all in this?
I didn't have a lot of people who understood exactly what was going on at home. We grew up in the 80s. There just weren't, there weren't Facebook groups. There weren't a lot of resources for families with special needs. And what I ended up doing was kind of pouring myself into school as a way of getting my needs met. I think I figured out at a pretty young age that I could get some attention from my teachers if I performed really well in school. And so I was an overachiever from a very young age. I would spend time at friends' houses whenever I could. Again, I didn't necessarily tell them. I didn't confide in them and tell them what was going on at home, but I soaked up that energy if I was over at a friend's house and their parent made me a sandwich. They're like little gestures that I just feel like I soaked up like a sponge because I wasn't getting that at home. Mm. And then as I got older in high school, there was some intervention from some of the school counselors who were aware of the physical abuse that I was, experiencing at home. And so I kind of found my way to some therapists and, some safe adults in high school. But up until that point, it was really just kind of school was my outlet. Yeah.
Well, because that's the part, like, it's one thing to be giving and helping people and serving others, your mom, your brother, but at the same time, something has to fill up your cup. You got to get, you have a lack of knowledge, a lack of experience. You don't know what you're dealing with here, and you're not a doctor. You don't have that kind of medical background to understand and figure out how you can best be the support that everyone in your family needs, especially at a young age. So to have a book like Forces of Nature, you think this would have been helpful then?
I do. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely written for adults. So at a young age, it wouldn't have been a resource, but I think it shows how you can kind of set boundaries and assert your own needs in a family where somebody else always needs more. And that's not just for people who have siblings with disabilities. I think that's true in families where maybe there's addiction or mental illness or chronic illness. I think there's a lot of dynamics where there might be somebody who kind of has to take a back seat because, somebody else in the family needs more. And so having the permission to voice your own needs, to identify your own needs. I mean, a lot of my process was as an adult learning to identify what my needs are, because I think I had muted them for so long that I wasn't even aware. Sometimes I wasn't even aware if I was hungry sometimes, because I think I was so focused externally on what everyone else needed. So that was a process too. It's just kind of learning to voice those needs and fill them for myself.
So what was the origin for writing the book? When did you realize that this book was inside of you and that you needed to share the message? Take us back to the beginning of writing the book. How did this start for you then?
I've always been a writer. My adult life, I've been a professional writer in different capacities, mostly as a travel and outdoors writer for different magazines. So writing has always been an outlet for me. But when Alan died, I found that I just really kind of wanted to chronicle what I was going through, not just in the aftermath. The book kind of follows the 10 months following his death, kind of the aftermath of what happened then. But then I wanted to document our childhood because I felt like, with him gone, it's up to me to make sense of what happened and who we were to each other. And I kind of tested the waters with an essay I wrote for the New York Times in 2018, where I wrote about, the title was Mourning the Loss of a Sibling Rival. And so I was writing about the experience of losing a sibling who had disabilities and some of the things that people said to me immediately after he died, which was that I might feel relief that I don't have to take care of him into old age. I think there were some people that thought that in the midst of the grief that I felt, that I might also be relieved of that burden. And that wasn't my experience. And so I wrote about that for the New York Times. I wrote about just kind of the complicated grief, the mixed feelings that came with his death. And I was really surprised by the response to it. I was expecting to hear back from other typical siblings who have siblings with disabilities. And what I heard was from the other people I was just talking about. I heard from siblings of people who suffered with addiction or mental illness, or people who just didn't feel seen in their family for one reason or another. And once I saw that and saw how it resonated with so many different types of complicated families, that's when I really felt like I needed to finish the story and write the book and put it out there.
Wow. What are you proud of about having the book coming out? There's got to be a part of you that goes, I did it, which is a big thing, but proud of the fact that the book's going to help people. What's exciting for you as the author, knowing that this is going to end up in the hands of somebody who needs it?
I mean, that's really it, is the connection piece. It is publishing, as you know, is a long road. And so there is the pride that I feel in the accomplishment. But at this point, I'm just really excited for it to get to the people that need it the most. And I'm excited to connect. I mean, I think one thing that's really common with any kind of grief is that it feels really isolating. Even if you know intellectually that other people have been through similar experiences, I think when you're going through it, it just feels like no one understands or you might be alone. And so having this book, putting it in the hands of somebody else to help them feel less alone. But then also like their stories reflected back to me encourages me and helps me feel less alone too. So there's just this, I'm looking forward to in-person events and kind of being face to face with some people who hopefully will benefit from reading it.
And celebrate the memory of Alan as well. And
yeah.
That's another piece of it, I would think too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. The whole time I was writing the book, I was asking myself, would he, and it's an interesting thing to think about because I don't know intellectually how much he would understand of this, but I had that in my mind. How much am I honoring him with this story? Am I kind of capturing him as completely and truthfully as possible? Would he be proud of it?
So in the writing process, I know I've talked to authors before, and they've said that there's things that didn't make it into the book that was a wrestling between, should I include it, should I not, or do I have enough room to include it, do I not? And there's some things that just don't make it into the book that might spark a future idea for another book or other things that they can do around content. But is there anything that stands out to you that you wished you maybe had included or you purposely didn't include? Just to give the idea to the readers and the other authors listening that, when you're writing your book, there are going to be things that you're going to have to kind of let go of and not include. Anything in there that you're kind of wrestling with as an author?
Nothing that I'm wrestling with, but I do think, especially with memoir, you have to go through this process where you kind of decide where the guardrails are. Where does my story end and one of my other family members' stories begin? Obviously, my story includes other people, so I am writing about them to an extent, but you have to make some decisions about where am I creeping into somebody else's perspective and somebody else's story. And that's where I kind of drew the line. And then, yeah, of course, there's things that don't fit. I mean, I think we had a really eventful, rich childhood, and I tried to choose incidents and scenes that were kind of emblematic of the experience as a whole. But yeah, there's definitely things that don't make it in, for better or for worse. I'm sure there's some happy memories that didn't make it in, and there's some darker ones that I did not include as well.
Yeah. And I guess that's the hard part when you're writing, is how to capture the story without leaving out key elements that would be necessary to explain or have part of the story. So I'm glad to hear that you work through that. Did you have anybody helping you in your journey as an author? Did you have any inspiration to kind of help you through the path? I'm hoping to inspire other authors through the podcast and learning from a fellow author. So any resources or any things that helped you as an author might help them as well. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I participated in some workshops early on. We have a wonderful writing center here in Colorado called Lighthouse Writers in Denver, and they do these advanced workshops where you apply, and if you're accepted, you go and spend a week with a well-known author who kind of will read your pages and give feedback. So that was really valuable, and I stayed connected with the authors that I worked with in the workshops there. I have a wonderful literary agent who's a great reader, so that's helpful to have somebody to bounce things off of. I think a lot of writers will share pages with people that they're really close to, which can be wonderful, but I would encourage you to also reach out to people who don't know you very well, who you can trust to give you some feedback that maybe is just a little bit more objective. If that involves joining a group where there's beta readers, where you exchange work, or hiring an editor, I really think that it's important, especially if you're looking towards publication, to get some readers who don't already know and love you so that they can give you some honest feedback.
Because they have a built-in bias and filter to support and love you and be there for you. And they might not pick up on some of the things that someone who's not closely connected to you might see, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't have that filter. So it's good.
Yeah. And they also just don't, I mean, especially with memoir, people who know you already know a lot of the context and backstory. So when I was able to show it to, like when I went to the workshop and shared it with people I don't know, other, well-established writers, they were able to ask questions and kind of show me some blind spots that I hadn't considered because they don't already know. They don't know everything about me. So their questions and their curiosity was really helpful. And I ended up adding probably about 10,000 words after that, because I realized there's some backstory that I needed that wasn't there.
Nice. That's great feedback. I like that. And then for the readers that are listening, your connection to them, like they're going to have your book as of May in their hands for the first time, and they're about to open it. They're going to read the first words that you've written for us. What's your love letter? What's your message to a reader who has picked up your book for the first time? What do you want them to know before they start reading your book?
Yeah, I would say if you grew up in a complicated family, or if you ever struggled to love a family member without abandoning yourself in the process, then my book is for you. I really want my story to give you permission to name both the joys and the heartaches of difficult families, and what it's like to kind of find your own voice. I want to show you how I created a path and found peace, and hopefully that will feel validating and you, as you said, on your own journey to find peace.
You mentioned growing up in school, you were focused on overachieving in school to capture the attention of your teachers and find your spot there as a different life outside of the home. Now with Alan gone and the book coming into the world, how are you changing? Are you still that same student looking to overachieve and create a mark in the world? Or are you finding a new path now with things changing in your family?
It's a good question. I think I'm kind of doomed, for better or for worse, to be an overachiever in everything, including in this book. It's been kind of an interesting dance between reminding myself of the why and the meaning behind it, and then focusing on, how can I do this the best way possible. I don't think I'm changing anything. This is one piece of my writing career, and I'm really proud of it. It's definitely the thing that, on my deathbed, if I hadn't published this book, I would have really regretted. So in that sense, it's really, really satisfying.
Yeah, because I know a friend of mine would be a self-admitted overachiever, and for him, he very seldom celebrates any form of success because he's always on to the next thing. And he very rarely takes a moment to go, but I did the thing that I set out to do. I did accomplish it. And before I jump to the next thing, I need to slow down and go, I'm just going to take this in. I'm going to celebrate the fact that I did the thing that I set out to do. And for you writing the book, you've achieved it. It's going to be here in our hands shortly for us to celebrate with you. So is there any sense for you that even though you're focused on overachieving, is there a sense of celebration? Are you going to be taking some time to, again, get out in front of people and talk about the book, but for you personally to celebrate the fact that this is now going to be a reality for us to have this book in our hands?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it becomes kind of a mindfulness practice. I'm not so much focused on the next thing, but I do tend to downplay success and not enjoy it as much as I would like. And so what I've been working on, and actually like talking about with my therapist leading up to this book launch, is just how do I savor those moments? And it's, some of the moments are big and some are small. Like when my first copies of the book arrived in the mail, just having it in my hands, just taking a moment and just saying, enjoying that and kind of holding it to my chest and really taking that in. When I get feedback from some of the early readers, just really taking a moment to kind of take that in and consider the thoughtfulness and to trust their praise too, I think is part of it. To trust that they're not just being nice and that they are saying these things because they actually really did enjoy the book and connect with it, which means that I've done what I set out to do.
When I was a young parent, a young dad with my firstborn, somebody came up beside me once and said, get used to the idea that your heart is going to beat outside of your chest for the rest of your life, in that you now have this new life. They're going to go places and do things you'll never do. And your heart will no longer be beating inside of you. As an author, I kind of see it the same way. You putting a piece of yourself out into the world. This book is going to end up places you'll never have been and meet people that you've never met. And they're going to be holding this book to their chest in the moment, going, this is the book that brought me comfort or helped me through a very interesting time in my life and the challenges I'm facing. This book has been there for me. And that's got to be exciting to know your book's going to go places that you may never be and touch lives you'll never know. That's got to be rewarding right there.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing about it. And from the very early days when I was writing this, I had this really strong image in my mind that I was taking something really important and I was kind of wrapping it up. I had this image of putting it in a little boat and floating it down a river. And I just kind of was trusting that all I can do is package this up and put it in this little boat and float it down the river and trust that the people who need to find it along the shore are going to find it. And it was kind of a meditation, a visual image that I was holding on to. And so at this point of the journey, I feel like my hand is on the stern of the boat and I'm letting go. And it's a wonderful feeling. I feel like it's not my book as much anymore as it belongs to the readers who are going to find it.
I like that. It's a great visual as well. I can see it just going down the river. I have no idea where this is going to go. It's that message in the bottle thing. You throw it out, right? You don't know where it's going. It's the same thing. So it's a good visual.
It's also a lesson in letting go. I mean, I think part of what makes that a really comforting image for me is that I've done everything I can do and I've let go, and now it's going to live in the world and do whatever it's going to do.
I just read, letting go. I just read a proverb recently where it talked about two monks were standing at a river and they had to cross the river. And to do so, they needed help from each other to do so. But then a woman walked up to the two of them and said, I need help getting across the river. And for these two monks, they have this thing where they're not allowed to interact with a woman or touch a woman. But this woman needed to be carried across the river to get to the other side. And so the monks looked at each other in that moment because they're not supposed to touch this person, but the person needed help. So one monk just reached over, put the woman up onto his shoulder, walked her across safely to the other side, and she carried on. The other monk got to the other side with him, and they kept walking and walking and walking. And after a while, the monk that didn't help the woman looked at the other monk and said, why did you do that? And in that moment, the monk looked at her, the other monk, and said, I put her down a long time ago. You keep carrying her. You keep carrying it. You need to let it go. Let's keep going in their journey, right? And I'm just like, oh, wow, right? There's so much of us that we just need to let things go. Yeah. And I think the fact that your book is out there helping people with that is going to be awesome because we need to identify the story, help the person in the moment, but at the same time, there's some stuff beyond our control and we need to let those things go, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. So before we go, talk us through the website. I have it up on the screen while we're chatting, and it's a beautiful website, by the way, Gina. Talk us through the website, your contact information and everything. And again, I have one last question before we part ways today, but take us through the website. I love it.
Yeah, my website is ginadwagner.com. And there's information about the book. There's some news and events. If you happen to live in Colorado or Georgia or Arizona, I'm going to be doing some bookstore events. And I would love for you guys to come out. You can see some of my other writing there too. Some of the magazine work that I mentioned is there. And then I also have a Substack newsletter that's free. I like to tell people I only email you when I have something really interesting or important to say. I won't spam you, and it's free. So yeah, you can subscribe to my newsletter or connect with me on Instagram. That's where I'm most active.
Excellent. Really appreciate it. And then I guess my last closing thought would be, we are going to celebrate the launch of the book and everything, but there's got to be more for you down the road. My name of my podcast is Living the Next Chapter. So I'm always kind of curious about what your next chapter is. Promoting the book, celebrating the book, all those things have to happen for sure. But I'm really curious, are you going to continue with your writing career? Are you going to continue working on new projects? What do you have envisioned down the road for yourself?
Yeah, I have been working on a bunch of essays around what I'm calling the intersections of nature and nurturing. So going back to earlier in our conversation where I talked about how nature can really reflect the human experience and it can provide a lot of healing. I've been writing a lot of essays kind of in that vein. A few of them have already been published, and I'm thinking about a few more and potentially pulling them all together into a collection. So that's kind of early stages, but it's something that I'm really excited about.
Excellent. Awesome. And we'll have information through your website on that as well to follow along?
Yes. Yep, absolutely. You can see some of the essays that I've already written, and then as that project goes on, I'll post about it there.
Awesome. And the book comes out on the 14th of May. Is that right? Good.
That's right.
Excellent. I love it. And again, everyone listening, all the information for Gina's on the website. We'll have a link in the show notes as always. It's a beautiful website. So go there and check it out and let Gina know you heard about her podcast, her book here on the podcast. And there's somebody listening, Gina, and they know this is going to be a great book for themselves or for a family member or a friend. So we're encouraging them to share this podcast with them. And I would encourage everyone that buys the book, please, when you buy it, leave a very detailed, amazing review for the book so that more people will find the book and find a great resource that'll help them on their journey as they support their loved ones. Gina, I really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun. Well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube, whatever app you're listening on. You'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to how to do this. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. Talk soon.